The shuttle doors opened, and Yoon Ha-rin stepped onto Station Vareth 9 for the first time in her life, carrying nothing but a single bag and 22 years of survival instincts burned into her bones. She was small by any standard, standing at just 165 centimeters with dark hair pulled back tight and eyes that had seen too much hardship for someone so young. But she walked with her spine straight and her chin up because her mother had taught her that much at least. The Galactic Defense Academy stretched before her like a city made of metal and light. And everywhere she looked, there were aliens of every shape and size moving with purpose and confidence. And not a single one of them looked like her. A massive reptilian creature in instructor uniform checked her credentials at the gate, his yellow eyes scanning her with barely hidden contempt before he waved her through without a word. And Ha-rin felt the weight of that silence more than any insult could have delivered. She was the first human ever admitted to this academy in its 400-year history. And everyone knew she was only here because Earth had just joined the Galactic Coalition, and someone in the diplomatic corps thought it would look good to have a human in uniform. The orientation hall was filled with over 300 cadets from more than 50 different species. And when Ha-rin found her assigned seat in the back corner, the cadets around her shifted away as if she carried some kind of disease. "Welcome to the academy," announced the commandant from the stage. An ancient Roshan named Ulith Dran, whose scales had faded to gray with age, but whose voice still commanded absolute attention. "You represent the finest warriors your species have to offer. And over the next 2 years we will forge you into the defenders this galaxy needs." Ha-rin listened carefully as they explained the ranking system, how every species was classified by physical capability and combat potential, and her heart sank lower with every word. Tier 1 was reserved for the Crescent with their 4 powerful arms and the Droshan with their incredible strength and armored hides. And the list went down through dozens of species until finally the instructor reached the bottom. "Humans," he read from his tablet, not even trying to hide his amusement. "Tier 7, minimal combat viability. Limited strength, slow healing, fragile skeletal structure. No natural weapons or defensive capabilities." Laughter rippled through the hall, and Ha-rin felt every eye turn toward her, the only human in a sea of predators. But she kept her face perfectly still and her hands relaxed in her lap, because she had learned long ago that showing pain only invited more. After orientation, they assigned quarters, and Ha-rin found herself sharing a room with a Vithani named Tyolax, an insectoid creature with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected Ha-rin's image back at her 100 times over. Tyolax looked at Ha-rin for exactly 3 seconds before turning away and beginning to unpack without any acknowledgement. And that was fine because Ha-rin had not come here to make friends. The equipment distribution was worse than she expected, with Ha-rin receiving the oldest training gear, armor that did not quite fit, and weapons that had clearly been rejected by everyone else. But she accepted it all without complaint and carried it back to her room with her head held high. The first strength assessment came 3 days later, and Ha-rin knew before she even stepped up to the testing station that this would be her public humiliation. Each cadet had to lift a calibrated weight that adjusted to their species baseline, and one by one, the other cadets demonstrated their power while instructors recorded the results. A Crescent named Morvax was the star of the day, his 4 arms working in perfect coordination to lift nearly twice his body weight while the crowd cheered. And when he set the weight down, he looked directly at Ha-rin with a smile that held no warmth. "Your turn, human," called Instructor Kethvorum, and Ha-rin walked to the platform with 200 species watching her every step. The weight was calibrated to human baseline, and she gripped it tight and pulled with everything she had, her muscles screaming and her teeth clenched. But the weight barely moved before her strength gave out and she had to let go. The laughter was immediate and cruel, echoing off the metal walls of the training hall, and Morvax's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Humans are the galaxy's participation trophy. He announced loud enough for everyone to hear. They should have sent a pet instead. At least a pet would be entertaining. Harin stood there with her failed attempt recorded for all to see, and the instructor was already calling the next cadet, already dismissing her as irrelevant. But she did not move. "When is the next assessment?" she asked, and her voice was calm and steady despite everything. HFY looked at her with something between pity and annoyance. "1 month from now, but I would not waste your time preparing if I were you." Harin nodded once and walked away from the platform, ignoring the whispers and the stares. And she did not stop walking until she reached her quarters where Tylax was studying and pretending she did not exist. That night, long after the station lights had dimmed to simulate evening, Harin made her way to the empty training gymnasium on the far side of the academy. The room was dark and cold and smelled like metal and sweat, and she found an old punching bag hanging in the corner that nobody had used in years. She wrapped her hands with strips torn from her spare uniform because she had no proper equipment, and she planted her feet and threw her first punch. The impact sent pain shooting up her arm, but she did not stop, throwing another punch and another until her knuckles split and blood began to stain the wrappings red. Her grandmother had survived a war that killed millions, and her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. And Harin had grown up knowing that the universe did not give anything to those who quit. She hit the bag until her arms would not lift anymore, and then she started kicking. And when her legs gave out, she did push-ups on the cold floor until her body simply refused to move. Only then did she allow herself to rest, lying on her back and staring at the ceiling with tears running down her temples. Not from sadness, but from the sheer exhaustion of pushing beyond every limit her body tried to set. Tomorrow they would laugh at her again, and the day after that they would laugh even harder. But Harin had not come across the galaxy to give up. She would show them what humans were made of, even if it killed her. 3 months passed on Station Verith 9, and Harin remained at the bottom of every ranking. But something had begun to change in the way others looked at her. She still failed most physical tests, and she still could not match the raw power of the stronger species. But the instructors had started to notice something they could not explain. During the endurance runs that happened every week, Harin would fall behind almost immediately as the faster species pulled ahead. But while others would stop when they reached their limits, Harin simply kept moving. She would run until her legs buckled, and then she would walk. And when she could not walk anymore, she would crawl on her hands and knees across the finish line hours after everyone else had already left. Instructor HFY watched her complete a 10-kilometer course in 14 hours, dragging herself the final 100 meters with her fingers digging into the metal floor. And for the first time in his 30 years of teaching, he did not know what to write in his assessment. "She has no quick response," he told Commander Ulith Dran during a private meeting. "I have trained thousands of cadets from hundreds of species, and I have never seen anything like this before." The Commandant said nothing, but his old eyes held a spark of interest that had not been there before. In the barracks, Tylax had begun to watch her human roommate with growing curiosity, staying awake at night to observe Harin return from her secret training sessions with bloody hands and torn muscles. Every morning Harin would wake up covered in bruises that had not been there the night before, and every morning she would get up and go to class as if nothing was wrong. "Your body is damaged," Tylax finally said one evening, breaking their months of silence. "You should report to medical." Harin looked up from lacing her boots and shrugged. "It will heal. It will heal faster if you rest," Tylax pointed out with the logical precision of her species. "I do not have time to rest," Harin replied, and then she was gone again, heading to the empty gymnasium where she spent every free moment. A Lithvani cadet named Soray had started sitting next to Harin during meals, one of the few cadets willing to be seen with the Academy's lowest-ranked student. Soray came from a water world, and her blue-gray skin glistened under the cafeteria lights as she pushed her tray closer to Harin's. "You know they are watching you." Harin looked up from her food with tired eyes. "Who's watching?" "Everyone," Saray admitted. "They do not understand why you keep going when you have no chance of passing the final evaluations." Harin considered this for a moment before answering. "On Earth we have a saying, fall 7 times and stand up 8. Saray tilted her head in the way her species did when they encountered something confusing. "But mathematically, that does not make sense." Harin smiled for the first time since arriving at the academy. "No, I suppose it does not." During a team simulation exercise the following week, Harin was assigned to a squad with 4 other cadets who made their displeasure clear from the beginning. "We are not going to fail because of the human," Morvax announced to the others, completely ignoring Harin standing right beside him. "We move fast and we move hard, and if she cannot keep up, then she gets left behind." The simulation began, and within minutes, the squad had disappeared into the obstacle course, while Harin struggled to climb the first wall. By the time she pulled herself over the top, her teammates were already gone, and the timer was counting down. Most cadets would have given up at that point, accepting the failure and waiting for extraction, but Harin dropped to the other side of the wall and started running. She completed every obstacle alone, taking 14 hours to finish what should have taken 2. Crawling through tunnels and climbing walls and dragging herself through mud pits long after the simulation had officially ended. When she finally crossed the finish line, the sun had risen twice on the station's artificial day cycle, and her body was more bruised than skin. The instructors did not know how to score her, marking her with both a failure for time and a note that read "completed all objectives independently." Morvax found her in the hallway the next day, blocking her path with his 4 massive arms crossed over his chest. "Why do you not go home?" he demanded, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "Your species does not belong here, and everyone knows it." Harin met his gaze without flinching, her small human body seeming even smaller against his bulk, but her voice was steady. "On my world, we did not survive by being the strongest," she told him. "We survived by being the ones who refused to die." Morvax snorted with contempt and walked away, but something in his step was less confident than before. That evening, Saray joined Tylax in their observation of Harin's training, the 2 aliens watching from the gymnasium doorway as the human threw herself against the punching bag over and over. "Her hands are bleeding again," Tylax noted, her compound eyes tracking every movement. "They always bleed," Saray replied, "and they always heal, and then she makes them bleed again. Why would any creature do this to itself?" Saray did not have an answer, but she was beginning to suspect that humans were not the weak species the Academy had classified them as. A week later, the announcement came through every speaker on the station, informing all cadets of a mandatory combat evaluation scheduled for the end of the month. Every cadet would be required to demonstrate their species' maximum combat capability through a standardized striking test, and the results would be recorded in the permanent Academy files. The problem for Harin was that humans had no recorded baseline because no human had ever attended the Academy before. Whatever score she achieved would become the official standard for her entire species. Instructor Kethvorum called her into his office and explained this with barely hidden satisfaction. "You will be representing all of humanity in this evaluation, Cadet Yoon." Harin stood at attention with her scarred hands behind her back. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Kethvorum leaned forward with his reptilian eyes narrowed. "Because if you fail, and you will fail, your species will be officially classified as non-combatants and barred from military service in the Coalition." The weight of that responsibility settled on Harin's shoulders like a physical thing, but she did not let it show on her face. "I understand, sir," she repeated, and then she requested permission to leave so she could go back to training. That night, she hit the bag harder than she ever had before, And when her hands split open, she wrapped them tighter and kept going. She was not just fighting for herself anymore. The combat evaluation arena was filled to capacity with over 2,000 spectators crowding the observation decks, and Yoon Ha-rin could feel every single pair of eyes on her as she waited for her turn. The arena floor was a massive circle of reinforced metal with a measurement pylon standing in the center. A pillar of advanced alloy designed to absorb and record the maximum striking force of any species in the galaxy. One by one, the cadets took their turns, stepping up to the pylon and demonstrating what their bodies were capable of. And the crowd cheered for the impressive scores and murmured with disappointment at the lower ones. A Vetani cadet like Tylax scored in the middle range, her chitinous fists connecting with precision that earned respectful nods from the instructors. A Lithvani like Saray scored lower due to her species' aquatic adaptation, but still within acceptable parameters for a support role. Then came Morvax, the four-armed Kresan who had tormented Ha-rin since her first day, and the crowd leaned forward with anticipation. He approached the pylon with the swagger of someone who knew exactly how good he was, rolling his massive shoulders and cracking the joints in all four of his hands. His first strike hit the pylon like a thunderclap, and the measurement display lit up with numbers that made the crowd gasp. His second and third and fourth strikes came in rapid succession, each one adding to his total. And when he stepped back, his score placed him firmly in the top 10 of the entire academy. Morvax turned to find Ha-rin in the crowd and pointed at her with a grin that showed every one of his sharp teeth. "Try to beat that human," he called out, and the laughter that followed cut through the arena like a blade. Ha-rin sat perfectly still in her seat, her hands folded in her lap, her face revealing nothing of the storm raging inside her. Name after name was called, and species after. Species demonstrated their power until, finally, the announcer's voice echoed through the arena, with the words Ha-rin had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Cadet Yoon Ha-rin, representing species human, please approach the measurement pylon." The walk from her seat to the arena floor felt like the longest journey of her life, and with every step she could hear the whispers and the snickers following her like shadows. She was so small compared to the cadets who had come before her, her human frame looking almost childlike against the massive pylon. And the instructors at the scoring table exchanged glances that said everything about their expectations. Instructor Kef Vorm stood at the edge of the arena with his arms crossed, his yellow eyes fixed on Ha-rin with cold certainty that she was about to humiliate herself and her entire species. "The rules are simple," the announcer explained. "Strike the pylon with your maximum force, and the sensors will record the result. You have one attempt unless recalibration is required." Ha-rin nodded and turned to face the pylon, placing her feet shoulder-width apart and raising her scarred hands in front of her. The arena went quiet, that special kind of silence that comes when a crowd expects to witness something embarrassing and wants to hear every moment of it. Ha-rin closed her eyes and breathed deep, filling her lungs with recycled station air. And in that darkness, she found something that had been sleeping inside her all along. She thought about her grandmother, who had crawled through burning rubble to save her children during a war that should have killed her. She thought about her mother, who had worked until her hands bled to put food on the table and hope in her daughter's heart. She thought about every human who had ever faced impossible odds and refused to accept defeat. Every ancestor who had survived predators and plagues and wars and famines, to pass their stubborn will to live down through the generations. Humans were not strong because of their muscles or their claws or their armor. Humans were strong because they came from a world that tried to kill them every single day, and they had looked death in the eye and said, "Not today." Ha-rin opened her eyes, and the air around her seemed to change, charged with something the aliens could not name but could definitely feel. She pulled her fist back, and in that moment she was not just one small woman standing alone in an arena full of predators. She was every human who had ever existed, every fighter and survivor and stubborn fool who had refused to stay down when the universe told them to quit. Her fist connected with the pylon, and the sound that followed was unlike anything the arena had ever heard. The measurement display flickered wildly as numbers scrolled faster than the eye could follow, and then the screen simply went blank with a single word flashing in red letters: overflow. The crowd sat in stunned silence as cracks spiderwebbed across the surface of the pylon. Cracks that should have been impossible because this alloy had been designed to withstand strikes from the strongest species in the galaxy. Instructor Kefvorm rushed forward with his tablet, convinced that the equipment must be malfunctioning because there was no way a human could have caused this. Recalibrate and strike again, he demanded, and the technicians scrambled to reset the system. Harin looked at her hand, at the knuckles that were already swelling and turning dark with bruises, and she knew that something was broken inside, but she did not care. She struck again. This time the pylon did not just crack, it shattered, fragments of reinforced alloy scattering across the arena floor as the measurement system gave up entirely and displayed nothing but error codes. The silence that followed was absolute. 2,000 spectators holding their breath as they tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Then a medical officer rushed forward because Harin was still standing there with her arm extended and blood dripping from her destroyed hand. "Her bones," the medic announced after scanning her with trembling hands. 3 fractures in the metacarpals, 2 in the wrist, and she is still standing. Tyalax turned to Saray with her compound eyes wide. "She broke herself to break the machine." "Humans," Saray whispered back. "They break themselves to break their enemies." Commander Ulithran rose from his seat in the observation deck, his ancient eyes fixed on the small human woman who had just done the impossible. He turned to his aide and spoke in a voice that carried the weight of 400 years of military experience. "Get me everything you have on the human homeworld," he ordered. "I want to know exactly what kind of planet produces creatures like her." Harin finally allowed the medics to lead her away, and as she walked toward the exit, she passed Morvax standing frozen with his mouth hanging open. She did not say a word. She did not need to, because the shattered pylon said everything. The joke was not laughing anymore. Commander Ulith Dran sat alone in his office, the lights dimmed and the door locked, as he read through the classified file on the human homeworld for the 3rd time. The words on his screen seemed impossible, a fever dream invented by someone who had never seen the real galaxy. But every piece of data was verified and every source was confirmed. Earth was classified as a death world, Category 4 on the Coalition's habitability scale, and that classification alone made the commander's scales itch with primal unease. Most species in the Academy came from Category 1 or Category 2 worlds, planets that had been carefully selected for colonization because of their stable climates and manageable ecosystems. Category 3 worlds were considered hazardous and required special equipment for long-term survival. Category 4 worlds had a 94% extinction rate for intelligent life. And yet humans had not only survived on Earth, but had thrived and spread across every corner of their deadly planet. The file contained images that made the commander lean back in his chair with something close to horror. Earth had predators that could tear a Droshan apart. Creatures called tigers and bears and sharks that hunted with brutal efficiency. Earth had weather events that could destroy entire cities, spinning columns of wind called tornadoes and walls of water called tsunamis that swept away everything in their path. Earth had diseases that evolved faster than any medical technology could counter. Microscopic killers that had wiped out millions of humans throughout their history. And the gravity was crushing, nearly twice the standard that most Coalition species considered comfortable, which explained why humans were so dense and so impossibly durable. But the most disturbing part of the file was not the planet itself. It was what the humans had done to survive it. They had developed something called the adrenal response, a chemical system that flooded their bodies in times of crisis and removed the natural limits that protected other species from damaging themselves. When a human was threatened, their body would release these chemicals, and suddenly they could lift weights that should have crushed their spines, run speeds that should have torn their muscles, and fight through injuries that would have killed any other creature. They turn off their own safety systems. The Ulith Dran muttered to himself. They destroy themselves to destroy their enemies. He called an emergency meeting of the senior staff, gathering the head instructors in the classified briefing room and sealing the door behind them. What I am about to show you does not leave this room. He began, and then he shared the file with their tablets. Instructor Keth Vorm was the first to speak, his voice unsteady in a way that none of his colleagues had ever heard before. This cannot be accurate, he insisted. No species evolves on a Category 4 world. They die. Humans did not receive that message, the commander replied. They evolved in an environment that tried to kill them every single day, and they responded by becoming the most stubborn creatures in the known galaxy. The instructors scrolled through the file in silence, their faces showing various degrees of disbelief and dawning terror. One section described how humans had hunted their planet's largest predators to extinction, not because they were stronger or faster, but because they simply refused to give up. Another section detailed something called persistence hunting, where humans would chase prey for hours or even days until the animal collapsed from exhaustion, because humans could regulate their body temperature in ways other Earth creatures could not. A third section covered human history, the wars and famines, and plagues that had killed billions and yet somehow only made the survivors stronger and more determined. We classified them as Tier 7. Keth Vorm said quietly, "We put them at the bottom of every ranking." "A mistake that I intend to correct," Ulethran announced. "But first we need to understand exactly what we are dealing with." While the instructors debated in their secret meeting, Arin lay in the medical bay with her right hand wrapped in regeneration bandages and her body pumped full of healing accelerants. The doctors had never treated a human before, and they were amazed at how quickly her tissue was responding, the fractures already beginning to knit themselves back together. Tyalax entered the medical bay with hesitation in her steps, her compound eyes scanning the room until they found Harin propped up on a bed near the window. "I did not know if visitors were allowed," she admitted, stopping at the foot of the bed. "They are not," Harin replied with a weak smile. "But I will not tell if you do not." Tyalax moved closer and looked at the bandaged hand that had shattered a pylon designed to withstand the strongest strikes in the galaxy. "Why do you keep going?" she asked. "Even when your body breaks, even when everyone laughs at you, why do you not just quit?" Harin considered the question carefully before answering. "When I was young, my mother worked 3 different jobs to keep us fed, and she came home every night with her feet bleeding and her back screaming in pain." Tyalax said nothing, just listened with her antenna tilted forward in the way her species showed attention. "I asked her once why she did not just give up." Harin continued, "Why she kept working so hard when it hurt so much." "What did she say?" Harin looked out. The window at the stars scattered across the endless black of space. She said that giving up was never an option. Not for her mother and not for her and not for me. Tyalax was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again. "Among my people, we do not understand this concept. When something is too hard, we simply find a different path. Humans do not have different paths." Arin explained, "We have the one in front of us, and we walk it until we reach the end or die trying." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," Harin admitted, "but it is also the only way we know how to live." Outside the medical bay, the news of Harin's performance was spreading through the academy like wildfire, and cadets who had laughed at her before were now watching every human documentary they could find with expressions of growing concern. Morvac sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall with his 4 hands hanging limp at his sides, trying to understand how a creature half his size with none of his natural advantages had done something he never could have done. He had called her a joke, a participation trophy, a mistake in admissions, and she had responded by breaking an unbreakable pylon with her bare hands. What else had he been wrong about? An alert suddenly blared through every speaker on the station, a piercing tone that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Emergency protocols activated and cadets rushed to their assigned shelter zones. But before Harin could even sit up in her bed, a different message appeared on her personal tablet. Cadet Yoon, the message read, "Report to command immediately. Your presence is required on the front line." Harin looked at her broken hand and then at the door, and she did not hesitate for even a second before swinging her legs off the bed. Someone needed her help, and pain had never stopped her before. The Vreth Raiders had come without warning, cutting through the station's outer defenses like a blade, through paper and breaching the Academy's main training deck before anyone could mount a proper response. Commander Yulith Dran stood in the command center watching the security feeds with cold fury burning in his ancient eyes. Counting 12 raiders in total, and at least 20 hostages, including young cadets, who had been in the middle of a training exercise. Soray was among them, her blue-gray skin pale with terror as a Vreth soldier held a weapon to her head. "Coalition reinforcements are 30 minutes away," reported his tactical officer. "Our defensive systems took heavy damage in the initial breach, and we cannot retake the deck without risking the hostages." 30 minutes was an eternity when children were involved, and Yulith Dran knew the Vreth well enough to understand they would not wait. The door to the command center opened and Harin walked in with her right hand still wrapped in bandages and her medical gown replaced by her cadet uniform. "You summoned me, Commander." Yulith Dran turned to face the small human who had shattered his understanding of species capability just hours before. "I did, Cadet Yoon, but I need you to understand exactly what I am asking." He pulled up the security feed on the main screen, showing the training deck where the Vreth had gathered their hostages in a circle surrounded by armed guards. 12 hostiles with military-grade weapons, he explained. 23 hostages, including 7 cadets under the age of 16. "We cannot wait for reinforcements, and we cannot storm the position without casualties." Harin studied the screen with eyes that had suddenly gone cold and focused, calculating distances and counting enemies and finding the gaps in their formation. "You want me to go in alone?" "I am giving you a choice," Yulith Dran corrected. "You can wait here with the other cadets in safety, or you can attempt a rescue that will almost certainly kill you." Harin did not hesitate. "Where is the entrance?" The commander handed her an access card and pointed to the service corridor on the map. "This tunnel leads directly to the training deck. They will not expect an approach from below." Harin took the card and turned toward the door, but before she could leave, a massive 4-armed figure stepped into her path. Morvac stood there with an expression she had never seen on his face before, something that looked almost like respect mixed with genuine fear. "You will die," he said, and for once there was no mockery in his voice. Harin looked up at the cadet who had tormented her since her first day, the one who had called her a joke and a trophy and a mistake. "Maybe," she admitted, "but they will not touch those kids." She walked around him and disappeared into the corridor, leaving Morvac standing there with his 4 arms hanging useless at his sides. The service tunnel was dark and narrow, and Harin moved through it with her good hand pressed against the wall for guidance, her broken hand throbbing with every heartbeat but still functional enough to form a fist. She could hear voices ahead, the harsh clicking language of the Vreth and the whimpered crying of frightened children. The tunnel opened onto a maintenance hatch in the floor of the training deck, and through the grating Harin could see exactly what she was facing. 12 Vreth soldiers armed with pulse rifles and vibration blades. Their insectoid bodies covered in natural armor that could stop most conventional weapons. The hostages were huddled in the center of the deck, with the youngest cadets pressed against Saray's sides as she tried to shield them with her own body. The lead raider was speaking into a communication device, demanding something from the station command in his alien language, and his soldiers were getting restless. Harin pushed open the hatch and pulled herself onto the deck, and for a moment, every eye in the room turned toward the small human woman standing alone against an army. The lead raider laughed, a horrible clicking sound that echoed off the metal walls. "One human," he mocked in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "They sent one human against us. Is this a joke?" Harin did not answer with words. She moved. The first raider went down before anyone could react, Harin's elbow connecting with the joint in his neck armor and sending him crashing to the floor. Weapons fired, but Harin was already somewhere else, ducking under pulses of energy and weaving between soldiers who could not track her unpredictable movements. A blade caught her shoulder and opened a gash that sprayed blood across the deck, but she did not stop. She broke arms and shattered joints and used the raiders' own weapons against them, fighting with a ferocity that the Vreth had never encountered in any species. 3 went down, then 4, then 6, and the remaining soldiers began to realize that this small human was not fighting like someone who was trying to survive. She was fighting like someone who had already accepted death and had nothing left to lose. The lead raider grabbed one of the young cadets, a small Vathani child barely out of his larval stage, and pressed his weapon against the child's head. "Stop," he commanded. "Stop or I kill this one." Harin stood in the center of the carnage with blood running from a dozen wounds, her broken hand hanging at an angle that said the bones had shifted again, but her eyes were fixed on that child. "Let him go," she said, and her voice was so calm it made the raider hesitate. "You are in no position to give orders, human." Harin took a step forward, and the raider took a step back, genuinely afraid of this small, bloody creature who would not stop coming. "On my world," Harin said quietly, "we have a saying about people who threaten children." She charged straight into his weapon fire, taking a pulse blast to her side that should have put her down, but she kept moving because her body had stopped listening to pain a long time ago. Her bare hand, the same hand she had broken on the pylon, struck the deck plating with everything she had left. The metal split, not cracked, not dented, split, a fractured 2 meters long opening in the reinforced training deck floor. The raider lost his footing and dropped the child, and in that moment of confusion, Harin hit him with a strike that crumpled his chest armor like paper. The remaining raiders fled, scrambling for the exits as this impossible human stood over their fallen leader with her broken body somehow still upright. Coalition reinforcements arrived to find Harin standing in the center of the deck surrounded by unconscious enemies, the hostages safe behind her, her arms covered in blood that was both hers and theirs. She looked at the soldiers who had come to rescue her and smiled. "What took you so long?" she asked, and then she finally let herself collapse. 2 weeks later, Harin returned to the academy with 17 different injuries still healing. And when she walked into the cafeteria, every single cadet stood up. Morvax was the first to rise, and he held his position of respect until she had taken her seat next to Tylax and Silray. "You are insane," Tylax told her. "All humans are completely insane." Harin just smiled and shrugged. "We prefer the word determined." Commander Ulithran personally updated the official Coalition species database that evening, changing the human combat classification from Tier 7 minimal viability to Tier 1 maximum threat. The notation in the file reads simply, "Do not underestimate, do not corner, and never threaten what they have chosen to protect." Harin had come to the academy as a joke, but she would leave it as a legend. And somewhere in the galaxy, other humans were waking up to the news that their species had finally proven what they were made of. The stars had a new apex predator, and she was only the beginning.